You are listening to Notables, an Education Through Music podcast. As always, I'm your host, Noah, and I'm joined today by Anthony Davis. Anthony has been called the Dean of African American Opera Composers, and his groundbreaking work, X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X, is scheduled to begin a one-month run at the Metropolitan Opera on November 3rd, 2023. Anthony, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you.
It's a very exciting time. We are right on the verge of a run of X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X at the Met, and we're sitting here in the Met press office, and I'm really excited to talk about all of that. But first, I want to go a little bit further back into the past because I know that you were born in Paterson, New Jersey, and I know that you graduated from Yale in 1975, and I don't know very much about what happened in between. And as this is a show about music education, I'd really like to know about how you became a musician.
That's okay. That's a good question. I think, I started as a pianist, and so my first experience playing the piano actually was when my family lived in Harlem until I was 4. Mm-hmm. And we lived in the same building that was on 138th Street in Madison, where Billy Taylor also lived in the same building. Okay. He's a great jazz pianist, and he was a friend of my dad's. So the first time literally I played the piano, I was in diapers sitting in Billy Taylor's lap playing the piano with Billy Taylor.
Wow, that's incredible.
So that was the start. And then when we moved to Princeton, New Jersey, I think when I was about 5. And in Princeton, I started studying piano more seriously, and I went to a school of music called for the Francis Clark School of Music, and they used to have all these books, Francis Clark books, and so what was interesting about Francis Clark was that they introduced you to contemporary music pretty much right away. I mean, I remember seeing, Prokofiev and Bartok and other stuff, not just, the standard kind of 18th, 19th century music.
Right. And
also they had, in addition to your individual lesson, you had a group lesson. And in the group lesson, they had cardboard keyboards. And they would put a melody on a board or rhythm or something, and you'd have to sing it. So I would sing and play, and that became a great tool for me because, I could practice, for example, in study hall or something. I could just play on the desk, and I could imagine the keyboard and hear the sounds.
Right.
So that was, and that made the connection of my ear to the piano, and kind of visualizing the keyboard. So. We also did a concert every month. We had a concert every month. A lot of it, and one of the part of the concert, you had to play your own composition. You had to make a piece. So I wrote pirate songs and stuff like that. So, and then we moved to State College, Pennsylvania when I was in 5th grade, and that's where Penn State is. And I continued to study piano. I had several teachers there. And one of them was Alan Mandel, who was he was actually recorded all of Charles Ives' piano music. So I remember seeing the Concord Sonata, and I had to turn pages for him for the Concord Sonata, and I think it had one inadvertent cluster because of my page turning. But I think Alcott's may have had another. But anyway, so I continued to play classical music, and I always my dad had a jazz collection. He liked mostly 40s, 50s jazz. So I heard. That he loved Ella Fitzgerald, and my mother was a big Frank Sinatra fan, so I heard that growing up. And then I also Billie Holiday. I listened to Lady in Satin, which one of her last recordings, and then as well as Cannonball Adderley and some other musicians, and the classical music I heard were mostly the records I bought were mostly classical. Ashkenazi piano playing, Chopin or Horowitz or something. So
Right.
so I was kind of into that direction. I had the Beethoven sonatas, Beethoven symphonies, Leonard Bernstein recordings of that.
Right.
And I had and one record that my father had was interesting was he had the Three Penny Opera, Blitzstein's version of it that was done with Lotte Lenya, and that terrified me. I remember hearing that music and wanting to hide under the dining room table because I thought it was so scary. But I was I was really impressed with the music and of course Peter and the Wolf and Tchaikovsky and and you heard a lot of music as I developed as a classical pianist. I played a lot of Schumann and Beethoven, and also some more Prokofiev and other more modern composers. A lot of Russian composers too,
Yeah.
Rachmaninoff. So. But one of the key things that happened was when I was in 10th grade, we moved to Italy. My father had a Fulbright to teach in Torino in Italy. And so, as a joke, one of my father's friends gave him a record called Monk in Italy. That was Thelonious Monk record. And my father, it was probably too weird for my father, but I loved I loved Monk's music, and I was captivated by it. And I was interested because also he was a composer as well as a pianist. My father was a real Art Tatum freak. He loved Art Tatum's playing. So I grew up listening to Art Tatum, and I loved Art Tatum's playing too. But Monk's music touched me in a way because I felt there was a unity in his compositional approach and how he approached the piano as an improviser. So I began to transcribe and be able to listening carefully to the Monk and learning some of the Monk tunes, etc. So, and at the time, at first in Italy, we didn't have a piano for a little bit until we finally rented a piano. But I would go to the Steinway store in downtown in Torino, and they had Steinway C's and Steinway D's. So I actually was playing the C's and playing real concert piano, and so I practiced there first, playing the classical music, but then I started playing some Monk tunes that I had been listening to. I started to be able to figure out what Monk was doing, and actually the people in the store really liked it when I was playing Monk's music. So, and then I did a number of concerts actually in Italy. I did concerts at consulates. One was at Torino Consulate, and then one in Florence and Firenze. Mm-hmm. So I did, and the concert was half classical, half my own music and jazz. Wow. So I did, the classical part. I was playing Schumann and Beethoven and stuff, and then the second half I played original composition that I'd done, and then some monk tunes that I had learned from the recordings, and so that was sort of the beginning of my developing as an improviser and developing as a composer sort of happened at the same time.
From what I know of your music, the best word to describe it might be eclectic, and it sounds like this musical upbringing, which is incredibly eclectic, from beginning with the contemporary music to your exposure to 50s jazz, and then being in Italy and playing at the Steinway store, and not getting kicked out of the Steinway store, which I would imagine means that you were playing quite well at the time. I can really hear that eclectic nature of the music kind of starting to take shape, and also this idea of the audiation that you were trained in when you were in Princeton. Seems like that must have sort of made it possible for you to be musical free of your instrument, sort of with a like a mental tie to the piano, but without requiring a piano.
Yeah, I think that was important, and also for me, it was interesting because I was never a great sight reader. Reading was the thing. Because, in fact, one of my teachers finally busted me because I was really playing by ear.
Right.
But I was playing Beethoven by ear, yeah.
Right.
But because, I remember I had a Rudolf Serkin record of Beethoven sonatas, and I was playing Beethoven sonatas, and my teacher came in and said, have you been listening to the Rudolf Serkin recording? And I was like literally playing like because it was a sonic experience, not just the notes on the page.
Right.
And so he busted me by making me sight read really easy music. And I was really embarrassed because I couldn't do it very well. and I said, well, just hum it. Then I could play it.
Right.
And I said, no, he wouldn't do it. I said, so I was really suffering. It's like it was getting busted for that because because I relied on my ears more than I relied on reading music, and so that's why my initial compositions were really written down. I was just like remembered improvisations. I would improvise and develop something and refine it, and then play it as a piece, and then I had to develop notation skills, how to notate what I was playing.
Right, and so your operatic work is a lot of it is improvisational. It has it requires players to improvise,
right?
And I wonder if that. Is that where that sort of began, this interest in the sonic experience over the notated experience and that sort of thing? And how does what is the process for determining how to do that in this
Well, it's interesting.
space?
Well, actually, that, again, in Italy, I had a wonderful, I was in school in Italy in 10th grade. I had a wonderful teacher named Charles McKay, who was was an English teacher, but also philosophy teacher. And originally he had come to Italy to become a priest. And he decided, he fell in love with a woman, so he realized the priesthood wasn't for him. And so he ended up in my school, teaching at my high school. And he started a philosophy class. And he had gotten very deeply into existentialism, which is a dangerous thing, I think, for 10th graders, 10th to 12th graders.
I would agree, yeah.
So I had this class, basically it was existentialism 101. It was like, so I read a lot of Nietzsche, and I read a lot of Kierkegaard, Sartre, et cetera. But Nietzsche and Kierkegaard were really interesting because I found essays that were related to music. I read Birth of Tragedy, which was Nietzsche's book, Either Or, which dealt with Don Giovanni and opera. So my interest in opera actually was piqued through my philosophy reading philosophy. And when I read Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche described a dichotomy between the Apollonian and the Dionysian. And I was very fascinated by that because the Apollonian representing kind of form and structure, et cetera, the traditional way of looking at art, and the Dionysian representing more of the, what he called music and the spirit of revolution, So this idea of this energy, creative energy and force. And so I thought what Nietzsche was describing was, to me, more the potential of American music than it was German music. And I thought that this idea of the Dionysian could be represented by the improvised, the idea of the improvisation, the African diaspora, that whole tradition, and then the European aspect of it, the European tradition of music through the Apollonian. So in a way that you could represent those two that dichotomy, that binary through the American engagement in both the African diaspora and European culture. So I was, in a way, that set the stage for my concept about opera. I began in 10th grade. I thought someone could write an opera that had improvisation as part of it. That was came out of the African American tradition of music, with also all the structure and form and et cetera of that coming from the European opera. And so when I went to Yale, I remember taking a music class that was supposed to be 19th century music, but was taught by Robert Bailey, who was a Wagner scholar. So I sort of force-fed Wagner in a big way, I mean, the 19th century to him was like Karl Marie Weber, you hear Der Freischütz, you listen to that, and then, listening to Wagner and studying Wagner's music. And I thought I was kind of appalled at first because, all this piano music that I liked, he didn't spend much time on Chopin and Brahms and
not
even
Beethoven,
so I was very interested in, but I was kind of, he was so immersed in I mean, he would literally tremble when there was a modulation, in the Wagner. So I began to think my first reaction was to write parodies of Wagner stuff. So what I decided to do, I did this. It was sort of influenced by Duke Ellington too. Was writing suites, that for my own group. But then I used leitmotifs. I had a list of motives that were part of this suite. So in a way, it was kind of a parody of when you look at a Wagner opera and you have the list in like a Schirmer edition or whatever, the list of all the leitmotifs and stuff. So I started looking at that and how to also structure long-term form, looking at long-term form, and was studying. And also I did stupid things like I wrote a fake book version of one of Wagner's operas. I just I wrote down the changes. So he was probably appalled by the whole thing, but it was also how I actually heard the music. I was saying, oh, that's a D flat. Right. Okay. No, it's a Tristan chord. Okay. Okay. So, but it was fun for me, listening to that. And then when I was at Yale, they did a concert production of Wozzeck. The first act of Wozzeck, and that killed me. That absolutely, I heard Maurice Todd and stuff, that from there. I still love that music. So, Berg was made a big difference to me. But what potential of opera could be, also how it could be psychological, and also how the music could play out with. Over long, how his approach to developmental long form. So
yeah.
So that's kind of set the stage for me. In the 70s, working in school and studying this music, and then listening to it, and I eventually started going to some operas.
And now for a short break. This podcast is made possible by Education Through Music. ETM's mission is to positively impact student motivation, achievement, and self-confidence by partnering with under-resourced schools to integrate music education into the core curriculum. To find out more or to support ETM in its mission, go to etmonline.org. Something you mentioned a bit earlier stood out to me, that you were a philosophy major at Yale, and I remembered your 10th grade English / philosophy inspired teacher, and I'm wondering if we could tie this back now to how these teachers, these various and very eclectic teachers, have impacted your work and your success as a composer all these years later.
One thing that's interesting is that all the art forms are connected. And as a musician, to be open to the fact that, how other disciplines can influence what you do, and to be open to that. And the idea, I think, fostered me the idea of collaboration, working with other artists, whether it's, a choreographer, dancer, a poet, a novelist, or all the ways you can collaborate with visual artists. I did a lot working with visual art too, and the fact that music doesn't have to just exist in itself. Music can relate to these other forms, and it's really fascinating to see that how one can discover that the connections of your music to all the outside world. Whether it's politics or society, or whether it's to painting or sculpture, or whether it's to poetry and dance. So that was exciting to me. Because in a way, I thought when you're going to work in opera, you have to realize that music isn't enough. Right. And music is only it's part of it.
Right.
And there's a desire to do more and to find ways, connections, the ways in which music can connect with a narrative, for example, or with an idea, a larger idea. And that's something I always was drawn to, and also to think about ideas and concepts that travel, through different art forms, and that are not just limited, to the idea, for example, of quote unquote pure music, or just kind of this modernist idea of what music can be, if not being. I never was particularly interested in that, because I always felt that there was so much more, and I think because in me I always felt that the need to express all aspects of myself, and not just it's not just about notes and pitch and rhythm,
right?
So I think find those connections, how ideas can be conveyed, and how they resonate through time, and also how music can give a different kind of frame of reference.
The big thing that I'm taking away from this conversation is just the sort of boundlessness of how music interacts with everything else. And everything else is just so multifaceted that music in turn ends up being having the potential to be very multifaceted. And I think that especially in education, where the different subjects are sort of siloed and kept separate from one another, it doesn't need to be that way. And it seems like there's a lot to be gained by not thinking of them in that way, and
no,
thinking
I
of
think
them as
so.
connected.
I remember when I first started teaching music, was that I taught at a school. This is kind of in the time between I left Yale for 2 years to because I wanted to work on my music, and then I came back and finally graduated as a music major. But I taught at a school called the Educational Center for the Arts in New Haven. And one of the emphasis in the school was, we did collaborative projects. So I worked with the dancer, visual artist, and we all were in the one room and try to make a piece together, make stuff together with the kids.
Yeah.
The kids create their own piece, and I thought that was, was very. I was very excited about that. Working in that way. The not feeling. The specialization in the arts, and not trying to separate it necessarily. So that you can find ways in which kind of a common language that you can be expressed, and so that was an exciting time to do that. At the same time, I was working with my own groups and trying to develop ideas, and thinking about how my music could work outside of just the music world.
Yeah. Anthony, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me and sharing your experience and your story. I'm inspired. I want to go write some music now.
Oh, great. Well, that's I tell everyone who listens that's what they should do.